Good evening, history buffs. John here. I almost said good morning nation. John here. I get them mixed up. I ain't gonna lie to you, son. So special shout out to the folks that were here during our Fox River days. Y'all remember that? Y'all remember being in YouTube jail for a week? I appreciate that support. I'm never gonna forget that. Thank y'all. So tonight, let's talk about the U.S. Constitution. It's kind of important, and it's a very interesting story, okay? So how we become a country and how the Constitution comes to be is really interesting in the fact that there's several events that led up to it, okay? The stamp tax, the Boston Tea Party. There was a paper tax where, people were just getting sick of being taxed. Sound familiar? And the biggest gripe that the colonists had back in these days, not all of them, most of them were actually pro-British still at this point, but some of them were just fed up because England was making the rules. You know, they were passing the laws, they were passing the taxes, and then, you know, it fell on down the line to the low man on the totem pole, which was the colonies. On the flip side, the colonists, who were technically still English, they had no say-so, no representation. They could send nobody to England to vote on these things, and so they were totally at the mercy of the king. That's really where the story begins, okay? Thomas Paine, he might have not have been the first one to figure this out, but Thomas Paine worked for a newspaper. He was well read, and he was one of these people that had enough, okay? He was very articulate in the way he spoke. Thomas Paine was the 1700s version of Tucker Carlson. He had a huge audience. People listened. When they heard Thomas Paine speak, they could relate to Thomas Paine. And so the things that he said, you know, really made sense to them, some of them. Most of the colonists, again, were pro-British and they didn't want to hear the nonsense. But he really woke up the founding fathers in this country. And they began to meet in private. They would have hung if they would have been caught here. And so what Thomas Paine did is he published a series of pamphlets. But the most important one was Common Sense. You folks can probably pull it up online for free. But here he's making the case in Common Sense. He's like, you know, we have all the rules and none of the reward. You know, we're getting crap shoveled onto us and we're getting nothing out of it. You know, we're being abused here. And this should be common sense to anybody that lives in the colonies, you know, which is why he named it Common Sense, okay? He was trying to wake people up. And at first he didn't put his name on these things. He would just lay them out. The redcoats were trying to figure out where these pamphlets were coming from. Son, they were popping up all over the place. And people were getting their hands on them. You know, and 10 or 12 people might read them and one person would wake up and say, hey, this cat's right. Whatever he's saying, I agree with this wholeheartedly. And so some of the merchants that were just getting taxed to death, they started to get on board. And then, of course, people like Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, etc. So the Revolutionary War happens. You know, it's hard to cover that in a span of 2 minutes. We know about the Revolutionary War. We know how it ended. Finally, the king says, you know, no more war. Y'all do y'all's own thing over there, sink or swim, whatever. I don't really care. It's just a pet project of mine anyway. So here we are as a nation, and we don't know where to go next. We don't know. Imagine that for a second. Y'all think 2021's crazy? with all the stuff that's going on, imagine being a brand new country with no compass. They have no idea where to go from here. So they begin to pull from several places. Okay, and an interesting fact really quickly, France actually structured its founding documents after our Bill of Rights and our Constitution. So there you go. That's how good of a document the Constitution is. So anyway, they're trying to figure out how to frame this thing. And they're like, you know, we're not just going to fly blind here. So they begin to look really hard at failed societies of the past. They begin, you know, with ancient Rome. They look at other failed societies and societies that were still standing, but they viewed as a failure. To give you a prime example here, Thomas Jefferson, his letters to the Danbury Church, okay? So this is where your separation of church and state come from. At this point, it's not in the Constitution whatsoever. But the Danbury Baptists, they send a letter to Thomas Jefferson. They're like, hey, look, you know, we feel like we're being oppressed here, you know, our churches and things. And he writes them back and he explains that there must be a wall of separation. That was his wording. So that's where the separation of church and state comes from. He says there must be a wall separating the two. And the reason, the primary reason that he said this was because of the corruption in the Catholic Church. If you'll remember, toward the end of the Roman Empire, the church had a huge influence, and it wasn't always a good influence, the Catholic Church, on the Roman Empire. And he was looking to avoid this, and he understood we got to keep the two separate. And then the next morning he went to church. He understood, okay, we're going to build the Constitution on biblical principles. A lot of people disagree with this, but that's the truth. Okay, Thomas Paine that I was just talking about, for most of his life, he was a self-proclaimed atheist. He didn't care nothing about religion, son. But when they called him up, they didn't really call him. You know what I'm saying? They sent him a letter and said, hey, we need help. Thomas Jefferson got a few people in there, okay? Let me see here. The father of the Constitution, of course, James Madison. He went to him a lot. But he also went back to Thomas Paine because Thomas Paine was one of the people that woke Jefferson up. And he went to these men and said, what needs to be in here? Thomas Paine, who's an atheist, says we need to build it on the backbone of the Holy Bible. Because his reasoning was, you must have, there must be consequences. You cannot have a society where people grow up and they don't know right from wrong. They don't know action and consequence. They don't have morals. While he was not a believer at this time, he was a fan of the fact that biblical morals were good. And they helped, he thought, to make a society where the rule of law mattered. And I would actually submit to you tonight, that is one of the biggest reasons that our country right now is failing, whether you are a Christian or non-believer. The point I'm trying to make with that is, if you take the Bible and you use it as a backbone, even the morals of the Bible, the sense of right and wrong, the sense of, man and wife, the sense of the nuclear family and loving everyone but protecting what is yours. If you take that, your society will thrive. And Thomas Paine understood this, and it's very strange because he's an atheist, but he's preaching this to Thomas Jefferson. He's like, we have to put this stuff in there, otherwise we're going to fail. And James Madison added a lot of the other stuff that you see in the Constitution. Okay, so they knew, people in 2021, they want to frame the Founding Fathers of our Constitution as being oppressive. And let me just say for the record, I really do wish this country would have started off on the right foot. I do wish that every man and woman would have had the same rights out of the gates, the same God-given rights, regardless of race or, sex or whatever. Everybody should be treated equally. And that's one place where I think they really messed up. But they were just becoming a country. They were bound, nobody's perfect. They were bound to stumble here and there. And that was a huge stumbling block for me. And it's ironic because later on, after the Constitution gets signed and everything, Thomas Paine becomes a non-fan of it. He basically invented the idea in common sense. And then he lived to regret it because he knew, he wrote pamphlets throughout his lifetime, and he knew later on he had messed up because he realized that there are privileged, wealthy individuals now making the laws for the common person. And so he really regretted that decision. That's another place they messed up, just saying. Interesting fact about the Constitution. Thanksgiving Day. What do you think Thanksgiving Day stands for? It was actually created by George Washington as a day to give thanks for the Constitution. Did y'all know that? That's pretty cool. Our founding fathers were, they were brilliant. I would argue they were brilliant for their time especially. Again, they looked back on history and they saw the shortfall and the shortcomings of previous civilizations. They said they screwed up there, we're not going to do that. They allowed tyranny, we're not going to do it. So on and so forth. They looked at the Bible, they took the morals of the Bible, and they built a constitution on that and on historical examples. And they framed this thing out so well because they knew what was coming. It's very weird. At the time that they did the Constitution, there were roughly 4 million Americans. And now it's something ridiculous, like almost 400 million or something, like 360 million or something. But they knew it. They knew we're becoming a new country. We're getting ready to see tons of people coming from all over the globe here to create this country. And they set certain measures up. For example, the Electoral College. Okay, so who was it? James somebody, not Madison, Wilson, James Wilson. He was actually an advocate for the popular vote back then. He was making the argument, the same tired argument that you hear today. Well, it's not a democracy unless we have a popular vote, blah, blah, blah. You hear it on the left all the time. We need a popular vote. But our founding fathers understood with this influx of people coming in, it wouldn't be long until major cities rose up and they were like the nucleus of populations here in the United States. So without the Electoral College, you can have a handful, 5, 6, maybe 7 major cities. And for example, if they're all liberal, progressive or whatever in 2021, the entire country flips and nobody else has a say-so whatsoever. They looked at the colonies prior to the Revolutionary War and how they had no representation. And that is why the Electoral College exists today. They wanted to make sure that farmers, in your flyover states, if you will, they have a say-so in their government. Because otherwise, people in Los Angeles would be dictating how people in Utah live. And to a degree, it still happens via the White House, but you have Congress and you have Senate for this reason, and again, the electoral vote. So people that complain about the electoral vote, they don't understand why it exists. Okay, if they either that or they do and they're in downtown New York City and they don't really care. because they want to be in power. But again, that's why it exists. So there you go. Another fun fact about the Constitution. Democracy, the word itself, democracy, is not mentioned a single time in the Constitution. I wonder why that is. It's because we're not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. And yes, there's a difference. I just explained one of the huge differences to you. In a democracy, the people, popular vote, would elect a president. In a constitutional republic, everybody gets represented equally. It doesn't matter if you're in Oregon, it doesn't matter if you're in Florida, if you're in West Virginia, everybody has a say-so in how the government is run and what their tax rate is, etc. Very important difference. And there are plenty of other differences as well. I want to close with this. This is very interesting, okay? So I want to tell you a little story about a country called Iceland. Okay, ever heard of it? Iceland is very unique. I studied Iceland in college, and I found myself going after the fact back and reading more up on their government. They really have their stuff together. Let me explain to you what I mean. So in Iceland, there has to be 2 congressional sessions in and out before a law can be passed nationally or changed, okay? And then after that, it has to be signed by their president. It has to be approved by the president. So here we go. Let's apply this to the United States, and I'll explain to you what I mean here, because this would fix a lot of the problems that we have here in the United States, just like this, okay? So, Second Amendment. It's always under attack by the left, always. You know, it's a guarantee. Like, you're going to wake up to a sunrise. Beetlejuice is not going to have control over the city. and then the attack on the Second Amendment. They're guarantees. So, in the United States, as it stands right now, the left wing, they have the Congress, they have the Senate, they have the White House. So in theory, they can push any bill they want to through. And Republicans at this point are left trying to go through the court system, praying that the Supreme Court does what it's supposed to do and be a stopgap, a tyranny stopper, if you will. It doesn't work this way in Iceland. So what would happen would be if they went after an amendment in Iceland and Congress passed it, their Congress passed it through, it would actually sit there and not be voted on until the next congressional session. In other words, you would have another midterm election, and then the people have the opportunity to vote those clowns out. You understand? So if they've done a really bad job or they're trying to push some nonsense through, the people can oust them at the next election, and then the bill dies. If the people are good with the bill that they're trying to pass that's sitting on a desk here at the end of the session, then they can vote the people back in to office, and then they can go back to work and they can push it through a second time. And after that second time, it goes to the president's desk. And then the president in Iceland is actually the one that works as the stopgap. And it's very rare in Iceland if you have left-wing Congress and then you have left-wing president. They usually have one and the other for this very reason. This stops a country from getting wrecked within a 4-year span. I want you to think about all of the damage, in my opinion, that is being done right now to this country, this administration, this, Congress and Senate, the squad and all this, all the damage they're doing to our country. And we're sitting here in America, twiddling our thumbs, hoping that we still have a country when it's time to vote again, and hoping that it's a free and fair election. They don't have this problem in Iceland. Just some food for thought. But anyway, the Constitution, I mean, the Bible, I think, is the most perfect document that exists, okay? The Constitution is a close second. It is not perfect, but it is, a lot of people consider it a living document. In other words, we'll just change it as we need to change it here in the United States. That's bad, okay? That is something our founding fathers knew was going to happen. They knew. At some point, they knew money is going to enter into the equation. You're going to have compromised individuals. They're going to start lining their pockets, and that's going to lead to tyranny. And that's why we have our Second Amendment. Don't let it fall, folks. The only amendment, let me just say this before I close it out, the only amendment that I believe is more important than the Second Amendment is the First Amendment. We must have freedom of speech. The second is so important because it protects the first. But I'm really worried in this country right now that we are starting to lose the First Amendment. And got to hold the line. I appreciate y'all being here tonight. Let me know in the comments what y'all want to cover next week. You know, not the Constitution again, but something else. What do y'all want to talk about historically speaking? And we'll do it over here. All right. Until next week, y'all take care and God bless.